"You're not really family," my mother-in-law said, cutting into her prime rib with deliberate precision. "You'll never understand our legacy." The words hung there like a challenge, like a statement of fact delivered from someone who had already decided my place in the world. We were at their country club in Newport Beach, California. The kind of place where old money wears designer labels and talks about bloodlines like their genetic superiority. I sat across from Margaret Caldwell, wife of Richard Caldwell Sr., matriarch of an empire built on commercial real estate development. Her daughter-in-law, the outsider, the woman who'd had the audacity to marry into their family. But what Margaret didn't know was that my family didn't just own things. We own the entire blueprint. My name is Isabella Reyes, and I come from a world that looks nothing like the Caldwell world on the surface. My father, Roberto Reyes, started with a single construction crew in Houston, Texas, working with his hands on job sites before he learned how to work in boardrooms. By the time I was born, Reyes Development was one of the largest privately held construction and property development firms in the Southwest. We didn't talk about it much outside the family. We didn't need to. Our work spoke for itself in every skyline, every shopping center, every mixed-use development that shaped the urban landscape from Dallas to Phoenix. I met Marcus Caldwell at Stanford Business School. He was studying finance, I was studying business management, and we met in a market analysis class where he argued with my thesis about commercial development timing. He was arrogant, brilliant, and completely unlike anyone I'd ever dated. By the time we graduated, I was in love with him. I also knew his family had no idea who I actually was. I deliberately kept my background quiet in our relationship. Not because I was ashamed. I was never ashamed of my father's accomplishments or my family's success. But I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what my name could do for a business. I wanted Marcus to choose me, not my resources. And I wanted to see if this perfect, polished family that kept talking about their legacy would actually accept me once I was officially theirs. They did not. The moment Margaret met me, I saw the calculation happen in real time. She assessed my clothes, good but not haute couture. My family background, I said my father was in construction, technically true but criminally incomplete. And my accent, Spanish was my first language, and it showed no matter how perfectly I spoke English. She'd smiled, but it was the smile a tennis player gives to an opponent from an inferior club. Richard Sr. was marginally warmer, but only because he was marginally conscious during most social interactions. Their son, Marcus's older brother James, was an actual venture capitalist and had the cold calculation of someone who only valued people based on their net worth. And then there was Marcus, caught between loving me and disappointing his family by choosing someone they deemed unworthy. But that Tuesday night at the country club, as Margaret delivered her cutting remark about never understanding their legacy, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I looked directly at her and smiled. "You're right," I said. "I'll never understand your legacy. But I understand my own perfectly well." I watched her expression change just slightly. She didn't quite know what that meant, but she sensed she'd missed something. That night, I made a call to my father. "Tell me everything about the Caldwell family business," I said. "Every property, every deal, every partnership. Everything." My father, Roberto, who had built an empire on reading contracts and understanding land development, laughed. "Why Mija?" he asked. "Because I'm going to find out if they've done anything illegal," I said. "And if they have, I'm going to make sure they pay for telling me I'm not family." What happened over the next 3 weeks changed my understanding of the Caldwell dynasty entirely. My father hired investigators, the kind of investigators that wealthy families hire when they're doing due diligence on acquisitions. What they found was a family business that looked pristine on the surface, but was hemorrhaging money in ways that made no financial sense. The Caldwell Development Group had been consolidating properties at an alarming rate, paying premium prices for commercial real estate, then letting them sit idle while generating no income. Unless the money was going somewhere else. "It's a shell game," my father's lead investigator, David Ortiz, explained to me over a secure video call. "They're buying properties using company funds, then transferring ownership to private trusts in different names. It's sophisticated, but once you understand the pattern, it's obvious." "That's embezzlement," I said quietly. "That's embezzlement," David confirmed. "From their own company. They're siphoning off business resources to build personal wealth that they're hiding from shareholders." "Who are the shareholders?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "There's a board of directors. Institutional investors. some family trusts. But look at this. David pulled up a document showing the board composition. Most of the board members are either directly related to Richard Sr. or have financial incentives to look the other way. They've created a system where they can steal from the company and no one with actual power to stop them cares enough to investigate. I felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't just a cruel mother-in-law and a dismissive family. This was fraud. This was the kind of thing that destroyed small investors, harmed employees whose pensions were tied to company performance, and corrupted the entire business structure. How much money are we talking about? I asked. David pulled up a spreadsheet. Column after column of transfers, each one buried in complex accounting, but traceable if you knew where to look. Over the past 7 years, approximately $47 million. $47 million. That number sat in my chest like a stone. What happens if this comes to light? I asked. Criminal charges, David said. Wire fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. Depending on the prosecution, we're talking about significant prison time for the individuals involved. Plus civil liability. The company would be liable for the missing funds, shareholders would have grounds for lawsuits, and the family name would be permanently damaged. I thanked David and ended the call. Then I sat in my apartment, the apartment Marcus had helped me pay for, with his family's money that had been built on fraud, and I made another decision. I didn't tell Marcus. Not yet. I needed to understand exactly what he knew and what he didn't. Over the next week, I watched him carefully. I paid attention to his conversations, his interactions with his family, his knowledge of the business. And I slowly realized that Marcus was largely insulated from the daily operations of the family business. He'd pursued finance independently, built his own career, and maintained a careful distance from his family's commercial enterprise. It was possible he genuinely didn't know what was happening. But his father knew. His mother definitely knew. And his brother James? James had his fingerprints all over the embezzlement scheme. I sat with that knowledge for another week before I made my move. I went to see a lawyer. Not any lawyer, but specifically a white-collar criminal attorney named Patricia Morrison, who specialized in complex financial crimes. I brought David's documentation and laid out everything I'd discovered. Why are you bringing this to me? Patricia asked, reading through the files with an expression that suggested she'd seen worse, but was always interested in a new angle on corporate theft. Because I need to know how to report this, I said. I need to know what the legal implications are for someone who knows about fraud but has family connections to the perpetrators. Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses. Are you asking how to protect yourself legally while blowing the whistle on your in-laws? I'm asking how to do the right thing, I said, without destroying my marriage in the process. Patricia set down her papers. I'm going to be honest with you. There is no way to do this without consequences for your relationship. You can report this to the SEC, to law enforcement, to the board's legal counsel. Any of those paths results in investigation, discovery, and accusations. Your family will find out. Your husband will find out. And they will blame you. I know, I said. But this is embezzlement. This is theft from shareholders. This is fraud. It absolutely is, Patricia agreed. And the fact that you're willing to sacrifice your marriage rather than let it slide tells me everything I need to know about your character. That conversation happened on a Thursday afternoon. I didn't tell Marcus what I was planning. I didn't tell my family yet. I simply sat with the decision. The following Monday, I walked into the offices of the Securities and Exchange Commission with Patricia as my attorney. I provided them with everything, David's documentation, the accounting trails, the list of properties, the shell corporations, everything. I explained my relationship to the Caldwell family and made clear that I was providing this information as a concerned individual who believed federal securities law had been violated. The SEC representative, a woman named Director Elena Vasquez, listened carefully to everything I said. This is serious, she said. If what you're describing is accurate, we're looking at significant criminal liability. It's accurate, I said. I've had it independently investigated. Elena leaned back in her chair. I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Are you doing this because you genuinely believe a crime has been committed, or are you doing this for other reasons? I thought about Margaret saying I'd never understand their legacy. I thought about James looking at me like I was a status symbol Marcus had acquired. I thought about Richard Sr. barely making eye contact because I wasn't worth his attention. I thought about being told I wasn't really family. I'm doing this because it's fraud, I said. And because everyone deserves to know that the family that claims to have a legacy of integrity has been systematically stealing from their own company. That's the only reason that matters. Elena nodded. Then we'll take it from here. This will take time. There will be investigations, interviews, possibly grand jury proceedings. Your cooperation is valuable, but you should know that your involvement will likely become public at some point. I understand, I said. I didn't tell Marcus until that evening. We were at home, in the kitchen of the apartment he'd helped me purchase, and I told him everything. I told him about discovering the embezzlement. I told him about hiring investigators. I told him about going to the SEC. I watched his face cycle through shock, denial, anger, and finally something that looked like resignation. You turned in my family, he said quietly. Not a question. A statement. I turned in people committing fraud, I corrected. If they happen to be your family, that's not my responsibility to manage. Isabella, they're going to go to prison. My mother, my father, my brother. Maybe, I said. If they did what I believe they did. And yes, they might go to prison. That's a consequence of committing federal crimes. Marcus left that night. He stayed at a hotel. He called his family and told them what I'd done, and the response was immediate and devastating. Margaret called me at midnight and told me that I was a traitor, that I'd proven what she'd always suspected, that I was a gold digger with no loyalty, that I'd destroyed their family out of jealousy and spite. I didn't defend myself. There was no point. Their narrative had already been written. What happened over the next 18 months was a legal process that moved with the inevitability of an avalanche. The SEC launched a formal investigation. They subpoenaed documents, conducted interviews, and brought in forensic accountants of their own. The findings confirmed everything David had discovered. The Caldwell family had systematically embezzled approximately $47 million from their company. Federal charges were filed against Richard Sr., Margaret, and James. They each faced counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy. Marcus wasn't charged. The investigation determined he had no knowledge of or involvement in the scheme, but his entire family was implicated. The trial was a spectacle that played out in the financial press. The Caldwell name, which had been synonymous with prestige and success in Southern California real estate circles for 4 decades, became synonymous with corruption. The company faced massive civil liability. Shareholders filed suit. The board of directors resigned en masse. And the family's reputation, that legacy Margaret had been so protective of, was dismantled piece by piece in a federal courtroom. Through it all, Marcus struggled. He was caught between his family and his wife. He was furious at his parents and brother for committing the crimes and furious at me for turning them in. We tried to make it work, we really did. But there was a rift that couldn't be bridged, a betrayal he couldn't forgive, a fundamental disagreement about what loyalty meant. 6 months into the trial, Marcus asked for a divorce. I didn't fight it. We both knew it was over. He couldn't be married to someone who'd destroyed his family, and I couldn't be married to someone who couldn't see that his family had destroyed themselves. The divorce was finalized in March. Richard Sr. was convicted in April. Margaret and James followed in June. I watched the news coverage of their sentencing with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. They'd brought this on themselves, but seeing Margaret let out of a federal courthouse in handcuffs was never going to feel like a victory. It just felt like the end of something that had never really begun. But here's what happened afterward that nobody expected. The SEC, impressed with the quality of the investigation and the evidence I'd provided, offered me a position. Not as an employee, but as a consultant. They wanted me to help other whistleblowers navigate complex financial crimes. They wanted my expertise, my family's connections to the development world, my ability to see patterns that others missed. I accepted. I took the position and moved back to Houston to be closer to my family. My father was proud of me, though he worried about the professional cost of being the woman who took down the Caldwell family. My mother made sure everyone in our community knew that I'd done the right thing, even when it cost me everything. A year after Marcus and I divorced, I received a letter from him. He'd stayed in California, was working in finance, and had put significant distance between himself and the remnants of his family. He wrote that he understood now what I'd been trying to do, that he'd spent time in therapy working through his family loyalty issues, that he wasn't asking for reconciliation, but he wanted me to know that he didn't hate me anymore. I didn't write back, but I kept the letter. What I learned from the Caldwell experience was that legacy isn't about bloodline or inherited wealth or the ability to exclude people you deem unworthy. Legacy is about choices. It's about what you do when you discover wrongdoing. It's about whether you prioritize family loyalty over ethical responsibility. It's about whether you can look yourself in the mirror, knowing you allowed fraud to continue unchecked. Margaret told me I'd never understand their legacy. She was right. I could never understand a legacy built on theft from shareholders, on exclusion, on the belief that certain people were inherently superior to others based on their family name. But I understand my own legacy just fine. It's the legacy of a woman who saw corruption and didn't look away, who had the courage to report fraud even when it meant destroying her marriage and losing her family by adoption, who understood that integrity doesn't have a price point, and loyalty to truth is always worth more than loyalty to blood. The Caldwell Company eventually recovered. New management was brought in, the company was restructured, and it found stability under different leadership. But the Caldwell name never fully recovered. The trust was gone. The golden image was tarnished beyond repair. And I became the woman people whispered about at country clubs. Not because I didn't belong, but because I had the strength to stand up and say that belonging to a family built on lies wasn't worth having. That was the legacy I chose. And I'd make the same choice again.